Hello, I'm Moonrain and welcome to my channel. I'm really excited to share this video with you today. I wanted to make something for those moments when you feel a little lost when interpreting a spread. Maybe your spread is a large mix of majors or maybe quarts and you aren't really sure how to weave them into like a clear interpretation. So today I'm going to show you like a very simple way to make sure you can make sense out of an open spread. This isn't the only way, of course, more just kind of like a tarot musings that I've just been tinkering with for the past couple of weeks, but I do hope it gives you something useful. Instead of forcing each card into a fixed meaning, you can collapse them into clear rules and from there shape them into simple readable sentences. So let's begin. Before we get into these examples, let me quickly explain the process. The method is very simple. We start with a very broad interpretation. We only collapse or make it a little bit more definitive when that type of broad answer or interpretation isn't enough. And we always finish by asking ourselves, did we actually answer the question? So here's how it works. We're going to divide it into majors, quarts, and minors. For majors show big themes. I'm sure you guys heard of archetypes, right? You can leave them as a broad type of process, archetype, or law, or we can narrow it down into a setting and only if needed into a person. Quartz shows ways of acting. If this spread calls for it, we can go from that state of energy and narrow it down into people. With minors describe everyday states or situations and they stay as they are. I'll be using Lenormand as well, and Lenormand's a little bit more literal. People cards are definitely people and cards are read like short sentences. Now you may be wondering, how do you collapse, right? How do you go down from one to another? And that totally depends on the type of question is being asked and if you are actually answering the question. So that's the method we'll be using today. And just a quick note, this is only my take. Feel free to adapt it in any way that works best for you or not at all. All right, let's get started. Before we jump into examples, I think it's best to first go over the type of questions and how these questions will actually shape the type of roles that each card will represent in the spread. These questions are incredibly crucial and the soul of the reading. So let's go over the first type. Let's do a more of like a spiritual type of question. So let's put spiritual here. So for spiritual, I'm going to put down like what kind of lesson am I supposed to learn in this situation. So I'll put what lesson am I supposed to learn, but ... So here we have what and lesson, and here for this gives us more of an archetypal type of energy. So this is more of like a broad theme. So I'll put broad theme here. Because we have you or the querent, we're going to have to look for something that represents the person querent and their internalized view or mindset, their internalized viewpoint, the broad theme, and an option for every time you have something that is so broad, like the broad theme here, we can put some sort of setting or container that holds where that particular broad theme plays out in. So let's say we do a 3-card reading. Let's see how that plays out in regards to assigning a role here with question. Okay. So here, the broad theme, right? We're seeing here it has to be the overall arching lesson. And here, because we have a major at the very end, it easily fits into that lesson. Here we have to learn the lesson of balance, right? So we have justice as the broad theme or lesson that we have to learn. Now for personal internalized viewpoint, here we can easily see that the very first card is the 9 of Cups, right? And we see that sort of internalized viewpoint here. So here we can put down that this queer person, or whether it's me because I'm putting I, this is kind of like where I'm at right now and this is the lesson that I have to learn. And here we have kind of the middleman showing us how to get to this point here in the lesson. So as you can see here, in regards to broad theme, that container, that archetype, here we have that justice card. Notice how the Hanged Man, even though it is a major arcana, we're not using it in the broad context of an archetype. Instead, we're using it more as, I would say, more of an action card, kind of showing us how to get to this point from A, right? Point A to point B. Notice how here we kept it at the most general, most overarching theme here, this major arcana. And here we collapsed it from a major arcana card showing us this broad theme, and we kind of collapsed it down more to an, I would say, an action card. And this is kind of like where it contains the broad theme. And here is the person, okay? I know, I'm so sorry guys that this is a little messy here, but I hope it makes sense. Here we're using a spiritual question about lessons and what you're supposed to learn this being the very last card and also a major arcana is screaming to us that this is definitely the lesson we have to learn, that lesson of balance. How you're starting out your personal, sorry, not personal, but your querent here is the Nine of Cups, showing us where we're starting, where we need to go, and how to get there with the Hanged Man. So now we have a very clear way of assigning the roles and making a very easy interpretation from here on out. So let's try another type of question here. I hope it made sense in regards to the collapse. We're not using these both as the archetype lessons. We're using this as the archetypal lesson, and we're bringing this one a couple of notches down. Instead of using this as an archetypal type of broad theme, we're bringing it down more to action and how to go from here to here. All right, so let's move on to a how question, more like about advice. Sorry, just keep it here for now. So with advice, how do I move forward? So for this how, we're going to be looking for an action or an inaction card. Again, so now we're looking for internalized mindset. So we're looking for a person card, whether it's a court card, a minor card, anything that shows us internalized viewpoint. For I questions, like I said, court cards or minors is usually not a major. Action and inaction can be minors as well as court cards, specifically more like knights or things like that. And then we can all have this under some sort of container or a setting. So I'll put setting as well. So these are the type of things we're looking for. A person card or something that represents a person card, whether it's a minor or a court card, an action or an inaction card, which can also be a minor or a court card, and then a setting, a container to help us continue this type of reading here with this advice. Oh, these cards came out, so we'll treat it. Okay. Notice how with the action and inaction here we have the Five of Wands, which is the action. The person internalized right here is that viewpoint, and the setting we have is that calling, that judgment. So that came out pretty nice here. So we see action here, that chaos between the different type of point of views. We see the Queen of Pentacles here. With the internalized viewpoint and just making things go slow and methodical, and with that setting here that we have, which is that calling card. So here we have the best way to go about with the different roles and how they can easily give you a good interpretation on how, right? We've got that action, person, and setting. Here we didn't have to necessarily, oh wait, we did. Action card remains the same, person internalized energy for court cards stays the same, but in regards to setting, we used the judgment card, which is a major arcana. Major arcanas are types more like broad archetypes, but we brought it down to a setting. So we brought it down a couple of notches in order to give us a little bit more of a coherent type of interpretation here. So let's move on to the next type of question. Hopefully this makes sense, and how we are assigning roles and how we're collapsing, you know, from either a very broad to a more specific type of role for that particular card. Specifically for majors, as you can see, we're not all going to use them as archetypes. Sometimes we're going to use them as a setting or a different type of container in regards or context with the question. And we can certainly do that with court cards as well. And after we're done with the type of questions, we're going to hit like what happens when you have multiple types of court cards and majors, and how we assign roles and how we use that, directionality and how that affects things. So we'll go over that in this video, and hopefully it won't be too long or bore you guys. All right, so let's do a question in regards to more of a narrative question. So like a why narrative, any type of why question. So this would be like, why is this happening to me? So let's put why this whatever happened. Okay, now in regards to why, we want to use archetypes, right? We want to use a broad theme. Now for the rest of it, we can think about the container, the setting that this is all happening. We can also think about the characters, who is involved here, and how their mindset or energy is affecting this particular setting and broad theme here. So we're going to put person. Okay, So here, the archetype here, we have the High Priestess. So that gives us a general theme of why this is happening. The setting here is in regards to relationships, and the internalized mindset here we have is the King of Wands. Look how easily that worked out, and how we easily assigned roles, and we're able to create a very coherent question in regards to this. We know exactly what this is about, what the person's thinking, and the broad or general theme in regards to the why. So let's keep on going. Let's do a question in regards to kind of more like a diagnostic or psychoanalytical. Let's think of a psychoanalytical question. All right, so what's at the root of all of this? So again, we have the word what. That should automatically make you think of a broad context, broad theme, archetype. Again, we can talk about, because this is the root, let's talk about the people. So if this is about the querent, the person, we need to understand their internalized viewpoint here and how it affects, and in context to the broad theme. Let's see here. And of course, because we have a broad theme, we could also bring in setting as well. Okay. Well, look, we have all majors here. The person internalized we have here, the mindset is the Fool. The broad context we can use here, the Devil or the Moon. But having the Fool, and here we can talk about a little bit more in regards to figures and how it could affect the reading. So and we'll go into this a little bit more once we hit multiple majors and courts, but since we have an example here already, I'm going to talk about gaze direction. So take a look at who's looking at who. Notice how the Fool is looking at the Devil, and the Moon is not necessarily looking at either one. So we look at the direction of the gaze, any eye contact, look at the posture. Is there any motion? Here we're looking at possible motion here, inaction here, and inaction here. We also look at the emotional stance here. While this doesn't necessarily show too much emotion, we do see slight emotion here with the Devil and possible curiosity here with the Fool. We also want to check for any shared traits. Why? This will give us a chance to see a progression of things. Whether when we start out the spread, are we seeing like nudity at a certain point that shows us a sense of freedom and innocence, or perhaps a showing that we are being honest. Are we seeing everybody clothed? Are we seeing an open stance versus more a closed stance? Are we seeing hidden hands? Any objects that are being held? And that one is, I feel, telling, whether we have an object that's being held on a certain person in one card and seeing something very similar on the other, that can show a continuity of that particular role or person in the context of that reading. Sorry. And for here, I can clearly see that this is the person internalized mindset in regards to the root of the issue. This is more likely the root of the issue when we have the Devil here, as we can see that they're both playing off. And then we could see this more in the context of possible, like the finality of the reading. And we started this because I like to use direction as one of the very top pressing things that I look for in any reading. So because the Fool is looking this way, and we're seeing this is definitely the root of the issue, and we're moving to the finale. So the direction of the spread is not going your typical left to right, but now it's going from right to left. So let's move on to the next type of question. We did more of a psychoanalytical. Let's do more of an outcome or predictive. I know that a lot of tarot tubers don't necessarily do this, but just in case you guys do, of course, I do have to emphasize that this is just a possibility. It's not finality. We all have, some. We do have control of our lives and what we do. So now when it comes to predictive, like what will happen in the future in regards to X, right? So we're going to put predictive, what will happen. So here we have the what. And this is really simple because we want a setting or a container for all of this question. Plus we want the people involved in this type of situation. And of course, the most important part is the outcome, right? cards here, what will happen? Notice again that these are all majors. It might just be a shuffling issue, because I did divide this deck into different categories for some other exercise. But of course, this is the whole point of this video, so let's try to interpret here. So here for the setting, we're going to use either the Sun or the Emperor. The type of mindset, it's much clearer to use either the Strength or the Emperor, and then the outcome. And of course, when I mentioned in regards to how to help you in regards to this, we are going to look at different things. So make sure to look at eye contact, gaze, posture, things like that. So as you can see here, we have the person looking away from these two, and these two are looking towards this. So this shows me there's a division in the spread here. So here we have the Emperor and the Sun looking towards the left versus Strength looking towards the right. So this to me shows that this is most likely the outcome here, where we're looking towards the future if we were to embrace Strength, right? So in regards to setting here, and the person, then I would possibly use the person as the Emperor, most likely the setting as the Sun, and outcome as the Strength. Using directionality does help a lot in regards to helping you in regards to figuring out like how are they interacting with each other, and how does it affect the possible outcome in regards to the interpretation or spread. All right, so now that we've kind of understood the type of questions and how it affects the roles, let's try to work on different examples here. Okay, so let's work on that. Okay, so in a spread, if you have multiple court cards, I think one of the things that one of the aspects that I think is incredibly important for the reading is determining their directionality, whether they're looking at each other, whether they're looking away, whether one's looking at one and the other one's not looking towards the general direction of the person. So as you can see here, so we're going to go over all of that. So let's see. So as we mentioned before, if you have, let's see, people cards that are facing each other, we have like some sort of interaction, a dialogue, a meeting, or maybe even a confrontation. If I were to go by the actual illustration here, I would say that the Knight of Swords is definitely more confrontational than the Knight of Wands. If I were to look at, let's see, for an example of people looking away, here we have the Page of Swords and the King of Swords. And as you can see here, this could mean that there's some sort of separation, avoidance, or even some sort of distance. However, if we were looking at perhaps a spread, let's put a card here and a card here, in which this card, depending on the spread, right? And we assumed that this was the outcome. Now, yes, we can look at this as two opposing people, two opposing viewpoints, whether this is the querent and what they're thinking or what they're doing versus another person. However, if this is the outcome, I wouldn't necessarily treat this as another person. This is where the collapse theory comes into play, where this is the querent, and this would most likely go from a person and collapsed down into advice or action you have to take. And the reason why I say that is because it's right next to the outcome, right? If we're treating something as the outcome, or even if something is a broad theme or concept, the archetypal overarching theme of the situation, the card next to it may not necessarily be a person. This might be more of the advice or the action in order to take, in order for that outcome to come to fruition. Or if we're going from broad theme down to outcome, this is the action that needs to be taken. So if, to point this out a little bit more clearly, this would be advice to get to outcome. If this was the broad theme, overarching archetypal force, this would most likely be the action to get to the outcome. So as you can see here, it totally depends, not necessarily just on the directionality as a, in regards to the other court card, but it also depends on what other court, what other card is next to these court cards. That also comes into play in regards to how we are going to treat them and how we are going to collapse them. Are we going to keep it at the mundane level of a person versus viewpoint versus advice, outcome, or action, setting, or type of container? All right, so we went over if they were not looking at each other or looking towards each other. And of course, we can go over ones where one's facing the person and the other one is not. So here we have maybe some sort of like confrontation, but more in a way that this person's going to be surprised. Of course, if we have something here, now we're seeing somebody who's facing towards the future or leaning towards the future versus somebody who's maybe looking towards the left-hand side, which shows us the attachment to the past or what they're bringing in from the past. This doesn't necessarily have to be on the left-hand side. Let's say that let's put a card here. So as you can see here, we have the Four of Cups, and we're having that sense of dissatisfaction. And this Page of Swords, even though they're looking towards the left, is showing that they're pulling in their past, right, of dissatisfaction into the spread here. And so that's something else to look at when regarding the spread. So we talked about attachment to the past, leaning to the future, or not even attachment to the past, but what they're bringing in from the past. Now, what about if they're facing forward? So let's look if we have a card here that shows us facing forward. There are directionality here. So for here, we have, if they're facing outward or towards the viewer, we have like more of a direct confrontation to us, a present moment. This shows that this could mean this is more of the broad theme versus an issue here. So if we were to have, maybe let's go like this. Notice how this card doesn't necessarily look, face, or gaze, or the posture is not engaging with the rest of the spread. So therefore I kind of move it to the side and use this as a separate subdivision of the spread. So here we're seeing more of the broad theme. I'm going to use this as more of either I'm going to use it as the archetypal energy here, the lesson that needs to be learned. So I'm going to put here, it's going to be either the lesson, archetypal theme. It's going to be perhaps even the outcome. Notice how this gives us some sort of finality or some sense of theme or general setting of what's going on here. So I could put even setting. As opposed to this shows us the action, the inaction. This gives us the overarching, the sequential interpretation here. So here we're seeing that Page of Swords here coming in with the Four of Cups, and we're seeing that action and how it could result into this outcome or this lesson. And the reason why we're going to see that this is more likely an outcome or the lesson that we will learn, so this is more of the future as opposed to past, is because everything is moving or looking towards this direction. If this was more of a setting, then I would expect these cards to maybe look towards here, how this is affecting these cards. So this movement of the spread would look towards there. So I would most likely attribute this more as an outcome and a lesson learned as opposed to a setting or a container for these cards because of just how these are arranged. So hopefully directionality is a little bit more clear now in regards to like how it would affect the roles of the cards. Okay, so don't just treat court cards as external persons. They can be, but not always. And make sure to look at how they're interacting with each other, what's looking to the left, what's looking to the right, what they're bringing in according to the cards next to it, and what's facing you. How does the card facing you mean in regards to the cards around it? Does it mean that it's an outcome? Does it mean that it's an advice? Is it the general theme of the situation or setting? So take a look at that and Hopefully that gives you a little bit more context and a little bit more of a sense of how to assign roles to each and every card in regards to the spread. All right, so let's move forward and continue. Okay, so before we started talking about the different types of court cards, we did mention that the important thing about dealing with court cards was directionality, but we also want to go over some baseline guidelines in regards to the different types of court cards. So for kings and queens, if the question is about relationships, family, workplace, or anything that involves status or authority, we can use this to determine whether these are external persons, such as your boss, your partner, coworker, your parent, and how that affects the reading. If the question is more psychoanalytical, perhaps, or inner focused, right? Like what pattern am I repeating? Is there some sort of like attachment issue that I have? Anything like that, then maybe the kings and queens can collapse as more internalized mindsets, maybe more about like self-image or how you hold authority, or the maturity level in regards like emotional intelligence or spiritual intelligence in regards to that particular aspect or pattern or situation you have inside yourself. So that is one aspect to look at that. And then in regards to knights, you can look at this more in regards to an action or a dynamic. You can also see that as a setting style. This could be the person or external actor, whether they take risk, push change, how do they charge. If it's a setting, feels more of like the tone of the moment more than a specific person, whether it's like a restless, fast moving type of environment as opposed to something a little bit more slower. I can't find my Knight of Pentacles, but you get the point. Now, in regards to the pages, on the other hand, now we're seeing a little bit something that can be signal the inner stance or the mindset of the person. So we're talking about something that shows up mentally rather than a fixed role or a person. This can talk about curiosity, learning, or hesitation, or some sort of immaturity. This obviously can be a point of view in regards to the court or an external person, whether it's coworker, parent, a partner, anything like that. So hopefully that helps a little bit in regards to just kind of giving a guideline in regards to the reading, and we'll go over some examples after this. All right, let's start with two questions here for multiple court cards. The first one is, why do I feel X, Y, and Z at work? Maybe why do I feel insecure? So let's see, why do I feel insecure at work? See if it's on the screen. Okay. So since we have the I here, we do want a person card to show us kind of the point of view. Work, definitely want to see some representation of the setting at work. And with personalized viewpoints, there could be a possibility of two. So we are looking for court cards or minors that show us two different opposing views or similar point of views, and how that affects and the dynamics between these cards or card and the setting at work. Let's see here. We can also see if we have some sort of like broad context to explain the why. So we need a card to explain the context of the why, and that can be answered with one or two cards that represents the viewpoints of the people. So this is maybe, and then definitely something that shows us the setting of work. All right, so let's pick a couple of cards here. Now, as we mentioned before, if we are talking in the context of work, we want to make sure that we use if we do have like a king or a queen card, to use that more of the authority figure. Here we have the King of Cups, so we're going to use the King of Cups as the boss or authority figure. Notice how the King of Cups and the Queen of Cups are not looking towards each other. So again, we're seeing that directionality does help in regards to answer this question and give us a sense of the authority figure and how they're relaying their authority with the setting or context of work. Here is the context of work. So notice how the King of Cups is looks as if they're offering that cup towards here. So maybe that setting at work kind of looks like it's very cliquish. They already act like it's a family, and there's a sense that this particular boss here kind of like encourages or fosters that kind of environment. Here we're seeing that separation, as we're seeing this person here looking away from this particular setting here, as well as the boss. We're seeing a discord between not just the boss but as well as the family, because had this been here, now we're seeing a completely different type of viewpoint. So when we see this kind of separation, we're seeing now we can use this as the viewpoint of the querent and how their mindset is and what they're feeling in regards to not just their boss but the type of setting here at work. And now we can give them a much better explanation or interpretation of their spread. So notice how they're holding on to that particular cup as opposed to offering or receiving, right? So we're getting context in regards to what they're holding, what it's similar about it, and how they're holding it. Notice what they're holding here as opposed to the queen here. Notice how the king is looking towards here at that family. That gives us that sense of how this person is treating work and that environment, how that environment is on its own, if we were to just look at it on its own. Where this card is in relation to the Queen of Cups, and how is this person relating to this card as well as this card. So as you can see here, it wasn't here, it was here. We're seeing a definite divisive type of role here. So there's so many things in context in regards to how you can see these cards, and when you assign the roles prior to even pulling the cards and saying, like, if you do get a King of Cups or a Queen, to assign it a boss, knowing or checking out the dynamics between them, how this card interacts with the other, and we can clearly assign this as the role of the boss. It makes things a lot more easier and to interpret here. So let's move on to a different question. Hopefully that made sense. I'm just trying to make sure that you guys realize, like, to create the roles, assign the roles. How do you assign the roles? By checking out the dynamics between the cards and seeing, like, who's looking at who, what are they doing, what are they holding? Does this look like it's the same person but in a different type of narrative arc, like time period, whether it's like beginning versus outcome? But no, it's very much looking like this is just a different person altogether. These are two different dynamics. It's not the same person. So these are all the little things you want to look at when you're trying to interpret spreads here. So another question we can ask is, am I going to be successful with XYZ? Like, could be a project they're working, like a creative project, or let's see, this is core cards. Okay, so again, we're just going in the context of core cards. I want to pick two so we just see how it works, because sometimes it's just hard when you're seeing so many core cards or majors in your reading and not knowing exactly if they're a bunch of people or versus more internalized viewpoints or advice or an outcome. These are all things you have to consider when creating a spread or interpreting a spread, better said. Okay. So again, maybe we want to get the energy or viewpoint of the person. We want to get a yes or no answer in regards to the success. We can get a container question. Contain meaning, are we getting setting or perhaps a broad context that gives us more of the energy in regards to the question here. So here we're getting the energy of the situation. We have here the Five of Wands. This show us competing or viewpoints, perhaps some sort of conflict. And here we're seeing the King of Wands and the Queen of Swords. So here we have possible person above you or not in regards to the situation. So they're the ones who are bringing in this competing conflict, competing viewpoint in regards to this, and this could be the actual person. Notice how when they're both looking, I don't see a very clear outcome, right? Because this is the person who's bringing in that conflict, and here we have the Queen of Swords kind of poised, ready to take action in regards to this person who's coming in with that type of viewpoint. So here we can say that, yes, sure, there's going to be a lot of issues in regards to this particular venture. However, because we have that competition, we're seeing a struggle, right? We're seeing that struggle coming in with that person. Will it be successful? Sure, if we were to have this person really be logical, right? So we're going to use the positive aspects of the Queen of Swords as opposed to more of our shadow attributes if we want to make sure that this person is able to overcome this situation, overcome this conflict. So if we were to say, it is a possibility, maybe this person is bringing in conflict, bringing in some situation in regards to the issue, but in order for this to be overcome, you have to embrace the positive aspects of the Queen of Swords. So here, when it comes to the roles, we're seeing here the energy. This could be viewpoint of some external factor, right? We're seeing this as the external factor or energy that's coming in or the setting, but this is the person who's bringing in this stuff. Look, notice how this arrangement or cards are behind this person. They're bringing this in, and they're bringing it into here, which is you. So this is not necessarily just you and just interpret it as you're the Queen of Swords, but this is most likely because it's at the end, and this is all moving from left to right. We're saying that in order for you to overcome this, you need to embody this. So this is not just a final outcome. This is not just you. This is advice. Okay, so yeah, sure, this can bring in the energy. This is a person who is bringing in this conflict, but this is not just your final ending. This is also embodying the advice of this particular situation. So that's how you are able to use roles and making sure that you're looking at how the direction affects the directionality of the spread and how they interplay and where is the beginning versus the end, or beginning versus end. In this case, it's moving from left to right. And I apologize, guys. I have such a really bad headache, and I really do hope I'm making sense. I feel like I've been at this for a number of hours. Okay, let's move on. So we've talked about courts don't necessarily always equal people. They could be external roles or inner authority. They can be the tone of the environment, advice or outcome, like we talked about with the Queen of Swords. She wasn't necessarily just an outcome, because that's not necessarily yes or no. It's more like, sure, but you have to make sure that you are embodying, the positive attributes of this particular court card in order for this to, or for you to overcome this particular obstacle. So making sure that you're truly answering questions. So in that case, it was not necessarily a very clear yes or no. It was like maybe, but yes, if you were to embody X and Y characteristics, right? So remember that whatever is before or after the card really affects the way that you read the card, whether this person is an external person in your life, meaning a boss, a friend, a family member, a co-worker, a neighbor. It truly depends on what's surrounding them in order for you to determine, again, the directionality of where things are going or headed, whether it's going from left to right, and it gives you that narrative arc, so you're able to determine what is what. That also really helps a lot. But sometimes the challenge isn't too many court cards. It's when the spread is kind of loaded with majors, and we had an example of that previously, when everything kind of feels big and archetypal if you're using so many majors in your spread. And again, we're going to do some samples of that, and we're going to talk about how we can bring them down a notch. And that totally, again, depends on the cards that are surrounding the majors and the directionality of how to read the spread here. All right, so let's move on to that in just a little bit. So now that we know how to handle multiple court cards and split them into roles, so they're not always all people, and let minors guide them which way to collapse, and as well as directionality. So let's move on to majors. So with majors, you always at least want to keep one broad theme, right? Something that gives you the archetypal situation or principle or lesson that you want to learn. So remember that. That's like number one. So number one, you want to have some sort of principle or lesson. So keep one at its most general or high level type of definition. So high level. Now with the other one, like if you have more than one, you want to collapse into perhaps some sort of container. So containers can be a setting or energy. And then we can move on to advice and perhaps even down into a person, but it's so unlikely. This is incredibly rare to use a major as a person. I would definitely keep it at this level here at most. With the court cards, we definitely did more here. Sure, we can use it as a lesson, but more of setting advice and a type of person. So this is more like courts, and here we have more of your majors. Okay, so let's do an example here. Question that, you know, a lot of currents ask is, should I get, or how about, should I take a chance? On blah, blah, blah. And this could be take a chance on someone or something. If it's someone, we're going to try to see if we have multiple or different viewpoints that we're seeing in the court cards, or minor arcana. So let's put that down. So we're going to see viewpoints, whether it's the querent and other person, if this is two people, if that's what the question entails. Also, we can put in a broad theme. So we're talking about a lesson to learn here in regards to that, and maybe perhaps some sort of outcome regarding this. Okay, so should I take a chance? The reason why I divided it into two is just so we have a chance to see multiple majors. So I'm gonna take at least two from here and take Right, so let's begin. So here, notice how the queen is more, her body is moving towards here, the tower. The devil here is kind of more of a standalone. So for me, the direction goes this way. So if that's the case, if I were to say, yeah, my gut's telling me that this is just moving from right to left, here we're seeing that this is the lesson. Are you able to overcome this addiction, this thing? And here we have the outcome. So the tower will be the final card. Now, if this is the lesson, this means that we're talking about the archetypal lesson here. So this is the broad theme. This is more of the high level definition of the card versus the tower, which will come out as an outcome, and not necessarily more of the broad or high level definition or context that we would typically use the tower. We would bring it down a notch, and this is where that collapse theory goes down. So this is at the highest level, and this is bringing it down a few notches in order to make this go into the outcome. And then here we have the Queen of Pentacles, which shows us the viewpoint and how this viewpoint can be something of a of a help and advice. So if you were to embrace this kind of viewpoint, then this could lead to this kind of outcome. And while this may look like a scary card, it's most likely necessary in order to overcome this kind of lesson. So this is where you assign the roles, look at the directionality, and make sure that you're answering the question. So from here on out, we're seeing here the lesson to be learned, the type of viewpoint you need to obtain or advice in order for this outcome to occur. And while this outcome may seem a little negative or scary, it's absolutely necessary in order to break free from this particular type of issue that you have at hand. So as you can see here, how creating a role really does help interpret the spread. All right. All right, so we're going to go over the baseline rules again. So remember, majors set the tone. If a major or chord card appear together, the major usually collapses as a broad theme or even a setting, and the chord card can be defaulted into a person. Minors are really good at anchoring the spread. A minor often tells you which chord card should collapse inward, whether it's going to be more of an internal viewpoint as opposed to an external character or a person in your life, and whether a major should be either in a broad context versus something more grounding, such as a setting, or a different type of container. So remember also that your minors or your chord cards can either be action or inert. Action minors show us movement, choice, planning, and we can collapse that into personal internal stances or even advices, versus more of like inert minors, which collapse into setting, containers, outcome, or even advice, right? So as you can see here, we can have this inert, which can define more of an outcome versus this as an advice. So those are the things that I just wanted to make sure that we emphasized, and that's kind of like the takeaway of this whole situation. Of course, something that's extremely important in regards to any type of spread is directionality, as we mentioned before, and we emphasize that throughout the whole video. Making sure that you realize how the different characters are interacting with each other, who are they gazing, whether they're looking left or right, and whether it's moving the spread from right to left versus left to right, giving it a narrative arc here. And I think that's pretty much it. Those are the kind of the big talking points that I wanted to discuss in regards to this particular situation. I hesitate calling it a theory because obviously it's just more of like my musings here that I've been doing in the last couple of weeks, and just going through this, trying to make this a little bit as clear as I possibly can. I feel like I've been videotaping this for quite some time now. I think this is like my 4th or 5th take for the past several weeks. And just adding to it. So hopefully this makes sense, and I would love to hear more about your tips and tricks in regards to interpreting spreads and how you assign roles, or perhaps how you read, whether it depends on how you see the figures or if you have a specific set of rules. Please comment below or make a video response. I would really love to see what your guys' thoughts are regarding this, and hopefully I get to see you guys in the next video. Thank you so much for watching. And